Welcome to the future of fashion. No, I'm just joking. No, thanks for coming. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I have a background in social science. I studied political science and international relations. Worked in those fields and mostly professional services. And I've been an entrepreneur, trying things and stubbornly failing at things and sometimes succeeding at things since I was 19. The things that have sort of really shaped my professional and personal life have been these 3-4 ideas, mostly around power and how it's used in society, how our public goods are managed, what makes up the social contract between us and other people or us and representatives, and some examples of very selfless leadership in the world. These things have really fascinated me, and they're fairly lofty, and I've tried to work on projects and initiatives that bring more of this sort of stuff out. So, very high level, I worked for 12 years in 4 different countries, worked in policy and management consulting, in development and impact investing, and most recently in the area of innovation, helping companies understand the future of their businesses. I've worked on a few different ventures, mostly brick and mortar companies, and I've taught a little bit at different institutions in Abu Dhabi at the Masdar Institute, which is a sustainability-focused university, and in Paris at Sciences Po. And I've written a lot and done some interviews. So that's me. Why you're here is because I'm working on something that is shaped by these 3 things here. I want to improve our civic life, deep sense of civic responsibility. I am really pissed off about the level of abuse of power we see in our systems and the absence of voice people have in systems. And I'm working on an alternative, and I want some feedback on it. Before I jump in, there are 3 or 4 definitions I just want to make sure are shared so that when I say stuff, you know what I'm talking about. So, what is governance? What do you guys think governance is? Anybody? No?
Set of rules.
Yeah, so very simply, it's like the process, the people involved, and the frequency of decision making to set the rules of how anything is being managed. Whether that's a company, it's an organization, it's a house, it's a room, it's who's involved, what's the process for decision making, how often is that decision making happening. And mostly around decisions and who. So that's governance there. And decentralization, what do we mean by decentralization?
Spreading power.
Yeah, so the opposite of centralization, and it's to distribute administrative power, either across a geography or across functions, so that voice or that capacity that was centralized in the middle is now distributed to other people to make those same magnitude of decisions.
I have a question on this.
Yep.
Maybe can you give us a definition of distributed then? Because I've heard of the 3 as being distinct. I'm happy to share it.
So decentralized still has some nodes of power, right? When you centralize, so this is a good description of it. So there's still some nodes here that act as coordinators, kind of coordinating up and down. Distributed means that those nodes are like, it's not really existent. Anyone can be a node, anyone can be a participant, depending on the magnitude of the decision being made. Normally, think of this inside a company. This means in order to manage those decisions, you have layers and layers of managers that coordinate. Here, you have processes that are replacing people. Okay? And then a couple more, last 2, liquid democracy. Have you guys heard of this? No?
Liquid organizations, the government's model using agile democracy. So anyway, it's not exactly the same. But.
Sure. It's a term used more and more in the blockchain and crypto sort of scene. It's basically mixing water with democracy to make it I'm just joking. You know. Think of like, anyone been part of a strata organization before, or a homeowner association? Yes, where you can give your voting rights to a delegate for a short period of time just to vote on a specific issue. It's a delegate-based form of democracy where you can provide them power for a short period of time and revoke that power after that period of time has ended or that issue has ended. They're able to do this online with tools that make it a little bit less frictionless, but it's not based on some person in the middle having power forever. It's based on issues, and you can kind of trade and move decision-making rights around. Okay? Finally, anyone heard of this term, holocracy? Or self-management except you? Anybody else? So this is, again, a different form of organizational decision-making. Don't read all this, but it's the opposite of a corporate hierarchy. All those functions of management have been made into processes. So instead of a manager deciding, if 7 of you, normal people, decide that this is the right way to move forward out of 10, that counts as a management decision. And this is how certain companies and organizations are being managed, through processes as opposed to people. Okay? So just being on the same page, please come in, grab a chair. There's chairs here, chairs in the back. About 11 years ago, I was an intern at the UN, at the General Assembly, and I was there teaching students from the inner city state schools of New York and the Bronx and Harlem and those places, as well as international schools, about how the international system works, how you govern the world, how do these countries barter with each other and arrive at solutions that are better for everybody. And growing up, like Ahmad said, and like you've heard a couple of my friends say, I studied political science. I thought the way to impact the world was to be a policymaker or a leader in government, someone that could really kind of craft the right kind of solutions for society. So that's me at the General Assembly. These were the types of kids that we were helping understand how this global bartering system worked. Last year, I was invited back to the UN with colleagues from Singularity University and the X Prize. In this time, it was on a different capacity. We were presenting to members of the states on the impact of exponential technologies. These are technologies that were growing at exponential rates, and what this was going to do to their institutions and how they could update themselves for this new world that we're living in. To me, coming out of that experience, there was a back and forth. We would present these case studies, the implications, what member states could do, and a member from whatever country would get up and read a pre-written, long kind of press release type document, you know, dictating their lovely position on this, or all junk, without any solutions in mind. I just came out of that experience feeling like the people that are meant to absorb this information and take actions have zero idea what world they're inheriting or what to do in these positions. I just felt they were very ill prepared for being managers of the public good. Right now, I mean, we have these types of issues like humanity challenging existential problems, things that can eliminate humanity, whether it's poverty, inequality, or climate change, sitting alongside the nicely crafted solutions that these people are coming up with that have no chance of impacting these problems at a similar scale. So let's take the UN for example really quickly. You have this institution that was built to prevent us from going to war again, right? To bring parties to the table, to force them or create a scenario where they would come up with new solutions for the problems that they face, whether they're economic, social, whatever. this is recent imagery from the war in Syria. This still continues. No solution in mind. These are some of the consequences from the war in Syria. The immigration crisis that is causing a lot of the political challenges in Europe and economic challenges in Europe, etc., etc. This is a travesty on its own. The rate at which climate change is happening and us really not having any viable plan to reverse this within a period of time. We're just hoping Elon Musk saves the day. Seriously. To me, like, all due respect to the UN, I've been, as you see, very strongly proponent of like reform in these institutions for different ideas to be presented and people to take more risks. And when I left the UN last year, I felt like it felt more like a retirement home for career diplomats than it did a place where novel humanity-saving solutions were being formed. It looked like a place where it was a museum of the past, of how we used to do things, not any indication of the future. And this is really emblematic of a lot of the organizations we see today, how they're structured, how they're designed. I feel like now, given the magnitude of the problems we have in the world, and these people that are in charge of problem solving not having the tools or the mindsets to come up with solutions, it's the equivalent of this, which is medical malpractice, you know? But we still continue to elect these individuals and hope that things will be the same. But on the flip side of all this, we live in a time when our ambitions are catching up to our dreams. What we're capable of doing today, there's never been a historical precedent. Down here in 1045, you have the creation of the printing press. 1990s, the first instances of mobile technology. Fast forward to present day time, and I'll share this presentation with people, so don't worry about wanting to take a lot of imagery and things. I'll share it with everyone. We can grow meat I actually ate one of these burgers in San Fran. It's called the Impossible Burger. It's a meat grown in a petri dish, yeah. So they trick the cells, they remove cells from animals, they trick them by growing them in their own pool of blood. So they think they're growing inside the body of the animal, and they grow into exactly the kind of thing that you want, whether it's filet mignon or whatever. Last month, we had these two guys, Swae and Zhong, the first monkeys that were cloned, grown in a lab. This is the next step is humans. Probably they already exist in some countries, right? This is imagery of the very first instance of a drone saving the life of two teenagers who were caught in a riptide in Australia. The drone geolocated them and knew where to drop exactly the thing, the life-saving us, and these guys swam to safety, right? It's super exciting. We live now in a time when we have exoskeletons that can help people that were previously disabled or impaired to be more capable than humans. Some of our profs at Singularity were saying they're going to have an Olympics X, where people with like exoskeletons, they'll have more strength than humans, and maybe they'll be able to do things we never imagined, new sports, new whatever. Gene editing, which you saw, 3D printing of almost anything, not at scale yet, but eventually. Why? Because all of these technologies are on exponential curves, which means they're getting cheaper and they're getting better every roughly 12 months. That's why they're growing at the pace that they are. This really shocked me to see. And it's so true. We live right now in a time when rockets land themselves, cars drive themselves, and money is managing itself, or it's governing itself, right? Just to speed up a little bit, these are the primary areas where a lot of the technology is growing exponentially. But where it's exciting is where these technologies meet and they cross paths. So when artificial intelligence and robotics cross paths, you have the invention of a self-driving car. It's now cheap enough and high quality enough in terms of computing power for the processor of the car to understand everything that's going on around them and make decisions as fast or better than humans can. Same with drones. Eventually, we won't have lifeguards anymore. These drones could be used to monitor the beaches and detect anomalous behavior and drop things when they need to. Imagine, the cost savings, or maybe the poor women that'll go to the beach and not see handsome lifeguards anymore. But we're living in a time when everything is digitally enabled, right? And if you heard this term, software eating the world, by Mark Andreessen, inventor of Netscape. Retail, driven by Amazon, completely software driven. Cameras, lighting from Philips, controlled entirely by software. Animation entirely by software. Let me give you one example of data. In 2016, we produced as much data as we had produced in the entire history of humanity, just in 1 year. Okay? Between now and the next 10 years, they believe this is going to double every year because the number of devices is proliferating. The capacity of those devices, the markers that they leave is proliferating. In 2027, they believe there'll be 150 billion devices producing data, from the sensors on your cars to your homes to your phones, your watches, all this sort of stuff. And data will reproduce itself in terms of volume every 12 hours, right? Every 12 hours, we're going to have as much data as we did in the entire of history. Imagine if you're the manager in charge of making really smart decisions because you went to the best schools, and everything is changing every 12 hours. It's a really exciting time. It's also a super scary time. You have these existential crises sitting alongside these technologies. And we don't know which one is going to eclipse the other. There's this story of hope, maybe we'll use these to save the world or improve the world. And a story of man, if we get more Trumps and more unprepared public managers, there could be some really serious problems. To me, the trajectory is clear. Taking a stance Holden did, more scientific or whatever, every institution that acts based on a previous set of operating assumptions is under a lot of pressure to reform itself. They will not survive in this next decade where things are changing so fast. This is what it feels like today. These two velocities, these are going in different directions. You have governance, which is the decision-making model that we have for understanding problems, deciding on alternatives, and institutionalizing something, competing against the fast-growing technology. And what it leaves there is this huge gap. If decision-making expects things to go linearly, 1 + 2 = 4, and technology and all this stuff is changing exponentially, you have this ever-widening deficit of performance and of expectations, right? But this is the height of what we get to choose from. Instead of these leaders diagnosing the real problems, the root cause of a lot of the problems we see in today's world, being management, organizational, other kinds of institutional, they're trying to distract us from picking left or right, progressive or conservative, or clown or crook, whatever. Instead of correctly diagnosing things, they're trying to shame millennials into going out to vote more and engage as if their vote really matters. It feels like the institutions that we have inherited were designed by an ideology of the past, okay? And in many cases, we sort of know this, but holding on to an outdated worldview can turn your strengths into weaknesses, as we see America breaking down, the UK breaking down, other countries in the same trajectory. Other countries, though, Estonia, Switzerland, they're embracing a whole other model for how to make decisions and how to embrace the challenges that they see in front of them. So let's look at why. Why, again, very quickly, this is happening. Most of the way we organize the world is like this. Centralized, pyramid, hierarchy. They're top-down, they're efficiency-driven. They're using the models of how we used to run factories for efficiency, for time for product output. Not a lot of participation, being told what to do and doing that the best way to run current day processes. The world's changed. The world's changing really fast. So there are consequences for this today. These kinds of institutions are these models are very disempowering. They're biased as well. People in those decision-making roles don't have all the information to pick the best alternative. Yet, they still do. They're slow. When the world is changing so fast, if you have to wait for decisions to be made through this funnel, you're going to lose a lot of opportunity. Finally, they're less accurate. There's a lot of statistics that show distributed decision-making is more accurate on average than centralized, expert-driven decision-making. But again, this is how today's systems usually work. They call this the hippo, which is the highest paid person's opinion. This often drives what happens inside a lot of organizations, right? And it happens everywhere. Government, associations, big companies, small companies. It's cultural, but it's so outdated. Our current day paradox is we walk around with these, everything we do is catered to, not in this city, but every other city in the world. You can get an Uber, it comes to you. Everything is technology enabled. But the most important things in our lives, the decisions we make in cities, communities, in our work, we have very little input into. It's like digital versus analog worlds. But very paternalistically, you talk to these leaders or people that are in decision-making roles, and they'll tell you, people are chaotic, they're crazy. You can't include them, and they don't have the skills. This is what it feels like to make decisions and collect feedback from everybody. It comes in different forms, in different tones, et cetera, et cetera. And you know what? You need more than an opinion to contribute. You need technical know-how, right? You can't just tweet something and hope that it will turn into something useful. But what's the cost of maintaining these kinds of systems? If we were doctors and we had to diagnose the system today, what would be some of the objective things that we're going to draw from? What can we see as some of the pains? By maintaining these systems, already we have these as evidence. 2 years ago, the credit worthiness of the United States was downgraded from AAA to AA because they don't believe that the institutions making decisions are doing them in a predictable, objective, clear way. Voter apathy is at some of the lowest points it's ever been in the history of democracies. People don't want to engage for left or right. Those are not the options that reflect them, so they stay home and they stay away from polls, particularly amongst the youth. At work, disengagement rates are some of the highest we've seen. 70% in some cases, found by Gallup, which is a very large market research company. And McKinsey says this is about a $500 billion problem of lost productivity just in the United States every year. People don't feel like they have a voice in the decision-making of their organization, and for them to be more productive and more engaged would require a big organizational transformation, which a lot of people aren't prepared for. Trust. Trust is at the lowest ever since Edelman, which is a big research company, started doing a barometer of trust in society. They found it to be lower than 50% in all 4 segments, from business, media, government, and NGOs. And you see this today, like there's a massive sense of distrust in a lot of things. People don't go to church or synagogues, they don't trust banks, they increasingly trust tech companies less, especially the big ones. These were the most kind of problematic ones that I found. Princeton did a study covering 20 years of policymaking in the United States, and they looked at 1,500 policy proposals by how they went from an idea to being law, and they saw that in none of those cases did average people's preferences or desires reflect in the direction of that policy. They found that those policies were determined a lot by special interest groups that knew how to game the system and drove their agendas against the will of the public, which means, I'm sorry, but the US is no longer a functioning democracy, right? It feels like this. Agencies, special interests, media are a lot bigger and more powerful than normal users. So you have the rise of like tons of political dishonesty with no consequences. Here in our country, I mean, this was the NHS example in London, where the people voting for leave, to leave the EU, would say, look, we spend so much money on paying taxes to the EU, let's save that and put it back into our NHS, into our healthcare system. And like 2 hours after they won the referendum, they said, we're canceling this promise. It doesn't make sense to fund the NHS. We're going to privatize the NHS. No consequence for completely, and they had like buses driving around London convincing people that this would be more economically sound. Here, a more controversial example is Trudeau. He made 2 very, very big campaign promises, one on Keystone and the pipeline, that he would not approve this, and second on electoral reform. These were like really big parts of his platform. Whether you agree or disagree, those are things that he did or he shouldn't have done. He promised to, that was the promise he made, and then he reversed this promise when he came into office. This is happening with like us not really having a chance to hold these people accountable, or it being too inconvenient to hold these people accountable. The consequence, again, this like beautiful graph, I use it everywhere for everything, like, is that there's a trust deficit now. Huge trust deficit, and it's too big to reconcile by just telling people to come out and elect a better leader. It's structural, it's institutional. We need an institutional intervention to change this. We need something that is going to adapt us to our times that are fast changing, not relying on the same old way of doing stuff. So let me fast forward a little bit, because I want to get to where we are. I'll come to this later, but basically it feels like our governance models and our decision-making models are like a vending machine, where whether you work or you participate in society, you pay taxes and you receive some services. You have no say in those services. When we currently, and like if you don't like them, you either protest or write letters or whatever, or elect someone different. We now have the tools to include people's voices in how those services, how policies, how resource allocation decisions are being made. Why do we not include them? This is the central kind of mystery. Now, our system of representative democracy was like super revolutionary 1,000 years ago, maybe even 200 years ago, when the system was a lot less complex, where communication was scarce, where you actually needed to go somewhere to meet in order to talk and deliberate. And only those that had a horse could do this. So you elected them. Holden, you have a horse, you're upper class or something, like you're my guy, you go and tell them I want some subsidies for my farm or for my crop. So he would go on behalf of all of us to the center of the city and represent us. those times don't exist anymore. Everyone, like this, eliminated those times. We can talk to anybody anywhere in the world so long as they're on the internet now. Because mobile phones are so cheap, there's more of them than there are humans. It's just made the flow of information and the marginal cost of communicating zero. And there's now 4 or so billion people online, 3 more billion coming in the next 3 years because of satellites. Imagine them all lining up to write a letter to their representative. Like, right? So there are some people saying, look, this model worked in the past, we need to experiment with something different. And that experimentation is happening in the blockchain communities, in these companies that I talked about that are self-managed, holocratic, employing models of liquid democracy. The largest ever participatory venture capital fund called the DAO. Does anyone know what the DAO? Yeah? Holden yourself? The DAO is a distributed autonomous organization. So imagine it's a holding company that has a number of rules, that based on these rules, anyone can participate in this company. Within, I think, less than a week, it raised $120 million by people that subscribe to this ideology. They invested their money using Bitcoin and said, we're going to use this as an investment fund. And the way we're going to decide is through this decision-making thing. Anyone can come with an idea. We're all going to have a chance to vote on this idea in a very technology-driven way. And if the majority of people decide after a certain threshold, we're going to allocate the money that we want into this idea. Why? Because they think expertise is distributed amongst everybody. Everyone has some genius to contribute. It's just a matter of making a process legitimate enough so that those people can contribute in the right stages. We don't need an investment manager. We'll reduce the costs of that, and we'll do more experimentation. And now there are companies running like this. Do you know a company named Zappos? Yeah? Do you guys know that it started to run as a self-managed holocratic company a couple of years ago with different success? So the CEO said, I'm sick of having managers. It costs me too much to have all this layer of management. I'd rather people make mistakes, but learn leadership, learn management, and we have processes and tools to manage people. And they took 1,500 people and they experimented with this model. And they're still a highly profitable company, a place where they have some of the lowest retention rates. So this was the past. There's a chance to make things a bit more customized, right? I'll give you this one example of Lego. This is where we draw some of our inspiration. They're using this philosophy that most people have good ideas. We just need a process to harness those ideas for our benefit and their benefit. They're creating new products using this a platform where anybody that either is a user of Lego or has an idea for a Lego set can come onto the platform and pitch a Lego set. It can be a rocket, it can be a dinosaur, whatever they like. But if they gather 10,000 votes for this, it goes to a committee that's made up of like designers, marketing people, production people that know how Legos function and how they're brought into the market. And if they all agree that this was a really good idea, let's try, they make this product. Not only that, but you as the inventor of the idea receive a royalty payment forever, so long as this is sold. So what just happened? You just made the entire creative population of the world your R&D market. As opposed to hiring people in charge of research and development, you've now created a process to tap into that collective wisdom and choose from the best for almost free. So these are some staff picks. Someone made a windmill. No one in Lego had ever made a windmill before. It's one of the best grossing products they've had, I think, in the Netherlands. So giving you some of these examples, like what examples would restore the legitimacy of our organizations, of our system, and make it work more for users. And this is where I've invented, creating a software protocol called Swae. It's a combination of artificial intelligence with collective intelligence to help organizations make better decisions. So really it allows people from the bottom to create ideas with the help of artificial intelligence and have them compete against each other and improve through the process. And the ones that survive are the ones that people decide on. Kind of like Dragon's Den for ideas. So meet Erica. She's a condo owner here in Vancouver. She's on the strata with 50 other condo owners, and she's a big fan of the environment. She has an idea for installing solar electricity on the rooftop of the building because she thinks that climate change is going to benefit Vancouver. No more rain, okay? But she's not an energy expert. She has not an urban planning background or any of this sort of stuff. She's a lawyer, poor her, and she's a full-time mom as well. What should she do? Should she go and hire a consultant or whatever? No problem. She comes onto our platform and she walks through this discovery process where she signs up, she says what organization she's come in from, and other people who live in her condo are also on the platform. We take her through the create section, which is she's creating a new idea. And she goes on to here and we ask her some very specific questions about the idea she has, to describe it in 10 words, to categorize it for us, to give us a summary, give us links to this working somewhere else in the world, talk about who benefits, how they benefit, what this replaces. There's about 10 or 12 questions that we ask. The more details, the better for us. And this is what sort of the discovery process looks like. And get a nice thank you at the end. What we do is we take all that data, and the first thing we do is we structure it into a nice, legible proposal. Kind of imagine Wikipedia, where you know where everything is, regardless of the article that you're looking for. The next thing we do is we do like 3 levels of augmentation. We look for bias in her language and suggest that she remove that bias. So the way that she's describing something may not present the case very well. We also look for areas where we can improve the language to make it more persuasive. And we suggest to her to make these improvements. Finally, we look for areas where we can add evidence so that it's not just an idea, it's now a case. It's an objective, non-biased case for how something should change. We also do something called concept matching. So if there are other ideas in our system or out on the web that are similar to hers that she hasn't seen, we suggest that she look at these. The same way that you go through Amazon, at the bottom of your selection, you have a bunch of other products that you should probably take a look at because of your buying patterns and your personality and all that sort of stuff. But we do a similar thing. Once she's ready to accept or amend those changes, she puts it onto the platform. And then all of her other people who live in the building can go onto that proposal and start to amend the proposal, make changes, suggestions, improvements. Then once it's sort of been improved or critiqued further, people can vote on the idea in this type of way. You sort of see where everyone sits, and it's non-binary. It's not a yes, no. It's a how much do you agree with this? So you as an organization can, if you're like a very important manager, you don't have time for the riffraff, you can say, if any idea passes 90% approval and has the consensus of 10% of the organization, then I'll see it. Then you let the system work with the people to feed you the best ideas, if there's demand to get those up to the top. And that's what we call organic idea graduation. So there's protocols in place. There's a system that can't be changed by one manager's decision. You set it up as an organization, and now this is how you are going to make certain types of decisions. And this is, we call it also efficient idea graduation. There are lots of use cases, and we're working in a few of them initially to test this out, test the efficacy that groups of diverse people can come up with good ideas as good or better than managers or centralized decision makers. That's the kind of thesis that we're trying to test here. And we see this working inside corporates for innovation management, for performance management, for ideation, for product feedback from customers or from users, for public consultations on like what to do with the new development project, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, we see it the same way like as Uber has sort of come into the world. It's kind of discontinuous. If Uber was a $77 billion experiment in how taxi services should work, not optimizing for how they currently do work, like just add an app and it'll take care of it. It's a redesign of how the whole company is organized. We think this is what we're doing as a 21st century decision-making process of how decision-making should work. Not every decision, gradually every decision. Because, let me fast forward a bit to this idea. So I talked about data, right? I talked about how it's proliferating every year, until 2027, where it proliferates every 12 hours, doubles. You got it? The current practice right now is like a hippo-dominated, highest paid employees' opinion-dominated decision-making practice. When there's volumes of data increase, those people will be crippled unless they're using advanced AI, and still they're not getting all the sentiment that they can from people. There's going to be a need for decentralization of decision making. Same here. It's almost an unavoidable future in our perspective. That right now we're kind of down here where we don't have enough data, and the culture still holds us back from distributing control over decision making. But as processing power of AI improves, and as the volume of data improves, we're going to have tools in place to allow for this to happen more and more. So that's sort of what we're working on. Just before I conclude, I want to go back in time a bit and say there was a time when society was ruled by monarchs, thousands of years ago, and they gave this impression that they were the privileged intermediary between us and God, that they could transmit the lessons and they were there to demonstrate how people should aspire to live. And then a few people came along and said, look, like, if I can pray and if I can think for myself, why should someone in between me and God interpret what I want? Why can't I have a direct relationship with God? And so they started to challenge this paradigm. There were political challenges, revolutions. It was a bloody mess until we got here. But I think we're at a similar type of inflection point where it's not a technological question, it's a cultural question of whether we are prepared to make decisions in collectives and not give away our precious power for other people to interpret our preferences. Maybe there's an in-between where we start on smaller decisions and move our way up, but I don't see a reality where we're governed by other people in that future. And I think, like, to conclude, if we are now colonizing other countries or other planets, we have countries in the world that are falling apart because they don't have governance systems. If we had to recreate our decision-making systems, would we do exactly what we're doing now, or would we do something different? Like, hands up for do something exactly as it is now. Hands up for more dictatorship. But hands up for experiments in more participation, combining technology and people. like, this is the world we're going to inherit in the next 10 years. And we think like the solution to all these problems, the ills of democracy, is more democracy, not less, right? So, thank you very much.